media, where we don't just report the news, we look deeper. Because some stories demand more than headlines, they demand truth. 18 years old, a college student, a daughter, a young black woman from the Bronx with her entire life ahead of her. Before July 5th, 2025, before the headlines and the protests, before the petitions and the public outrage, Ms. Cheatham was just a teenager. She was building her future one step at a time, a future that her family says was full of potential. She grew up in the Bronx, one of New York City's most vibrant but also most challenging boroughs. Her mother describes her as a beautiful soul with a contagious smile, the kind of person who could brighten up any room just by walking into it. Her friends say she was full of energy, witty, and fiercely loyal, a young woman who stood up for those she cared about. At just 18, she was already enrolled at Bronx Community College. She was studying hard and dreaming of the day she could take her skills and her education beyond the city streets where she was raised. She wanted to build something better for herself, for her family, for her future. She loved to cook, a passion she inherited from her grandmother, and her family remembers countless evenings when she would take over the kitchen, laughing, experimenting, and making sure everyone had a plate. She also loved spending time with the people closest to her. Whether it was a quiet evening at home or a big family barbecue, she cherished moments of connection. She wasn't perfect, no teenager is, but to her loved ones, she was so much more than what the headlines would later reduce her to. Inmate, arrestee, suicide in custody. She was a person, a daughter, a friend, someone who deserved the chance to grow up, make mistakes, and figure out who she wanted to be. That's why the events of July 4th hit her family like a bolt of lightning. On that day, Ms. Cheatham attended a family cookout, a celebration meant to be full of laughter, food, and fireworks. But somewhere between the joy and the celebration, something went terribly wrong. According to police reports, she got into an argument, reportedly with her girlfriend. What started as words quickly turned into something more heated. Witnesses say things escalated fast. A fight broke out. Someone called the police. When NYPD officers arrived, they made an arrest. Not of multiple people, not of everyone involved. They arrested her. By the end of the night, she was in handcuffs, being transported to the 41st Precinct Station House in Hunts Point, one of the most notoriously tough precincts in the Bronx, a place some locals refer to as the Tombs of Hunts Point. Her family thought they'd see her the next day, maybe shaken up, maybe upset, but alive. Instead, they'd soon get a call no parent should ever receive. Humid July night in New York City. The station, like many across the city, was busy, holding cells crowded with people waiting to see a judge or just waiting for someone to post bail. According to the NYPD, Ms. Cheatham was processed and then placed in a holding cell, alone. For most people, this would be a terrifying experience. You're 18, it's your first time in a jail cell, you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're sitting in one of the most notoriously rough precincts in the Bronx. But this is where the official story begins to raise red flags. The NYPD claims that at 12:30 a.m. on July 5th, less than 12 hours after her arrest, she was found unresponsive in that cell. Officers say they discovered her hanging by a sweater her family insists she didn't even have that night. They say they immediately began CPR. They called for EMS, and by the time paramedics arrived, she didn't have a pulse. She was rushed to Lincoln Hospital, but within minutes of arriving, she was pronounced dead. On July 14, the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner officially ruled her death a suicide by hanging. But let's pause here. Her family says none of this makes sense. They insist she wasn't wearing a sweater that night. They insist she had no history of suicidal behavior. They insist she was in good spirits when they last saw her, hours before she was booked into that cell. And here's where NYPD policy makes this even harder to understand. According to NYPD Patrol Guide Section 2, 10-03, officers are required to check on prisoners in holding cells at least every 30 minutes. If a detainee is classified as emotionally disturbed, or there's any concern for self-harm, those checks must be even more frequent, every 15 minutes or less. These checks aren't supposed to be just glances. They're meant to be real, Physical observations. Officers are required to log the time and nature of each check. If those checks were done, if they were logged, and if someone actually looked in on her regularly. How is it that no one noticed anything until it was too late? Did they follow policy? Were those checks done? Were they documented? The NYPD hasn't said. And that leads to a troubling question. If the required monitoring was actually in place, how does a young woman hang herself with no one noticing in time to save her? The NYPD says this was suicide. But if that's the case, why haven't we seen the footage? Because there is footage. There are cameras in those precincts, and there are body-worn cameras on the officers who arrested her. But none of that has been released to the family or the public. Instead, all we have is the NYPD's word. And for a family in mourning, for a community demanding answers, that's not enough. So what happened in that cell between the time she was processed and the time she was found unresponsive? That's the question her family, and now the public, is demanding to know. As the days passed after her death, the story didn't fade away. It grew louder. Community members organized vigils outside the 41st Precinct, placing candles, flowers, and handwritten notes demanding justice. Protesters filled the streets of the Bronx, holding signs with her face. The chant was simple but powerful. Say her name. Across social media, people from around the country, many of whom had never met her, were sharing her story, because to them it wasn't just about this case. It was about a system that keeps failing, and for many the parallels are impossible to ignore. In 2015, Sandra Bland, a 28-year-old black woman, was found dead in a Texas jail cell 3 days after being arrested during a traffic stop. The official ruling, suicide by hanging. Her family didn't believe it. They pushed for answers. They never got all of them. In 2022, Denisha Montgomery, a 27-year-old black army soldier, was found dead in her barracks in Germany. Again, officials said suicide. Again, her family questioned everything. Now, in 2025, we add Ms. Cheatham to that painful list. Why do these cases feel so familiar? Because in each one, we're told the same thing. It was suicide. Trust us. But the families are left with more questions than answers. And here's where the handling of this case by the NYPD raises even more concerns. The investigation has been handed over to the department's Force Investigation Division, a unit meant to review in custody deaths. But so far, the family hasn't received the surveillance footage from the night she died. They haven't seen the body-worn camera footage from the arresting officers, and they still don't have the full autopsy report, only the final ruling. This lack of transparency has fueled public outrage. Ben Crump and activists argue that the NYPD is hiding something. If this was a straightforward suicide, why not release the footage? Why not give the family the full report? What are they waiting for? And so we have to ask, what really happened in that holding cell? Was she properly monitored as NYPD policy requires? Or were those 30-minute prisoner checks skipped, ignored, or falsified? Her family deserves answers. Her community deserves accountability. And we, the public, deserve the truth. But that won't happen unless we keep talking about her, unless we demand transparency, unless we refuse to look away. At White Eyes Media, our mission is to tell the stories others won't, and keep the spotlight on the ones that matter, even when the headlines fade. If you stand with justice, share this video, sign the petitions, leave a comment with your thoughts, and keep this conversation going, because silence only serves those who want the truth buried. And to Ms. Cheatham family, and every family who's lost someone under suspicious circumstances in custody, we see you, we hear you, and we'll keep our eyes wide open. This is White Eyes Media, and we will continue to monitor this case closely, bringing you updates as soon as new information comes to light, because her story isn't over, and neither is our fight to uncover the truth.